Hello there, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the most common logical fallacies. I chose these particular set of fallacies beyond all of the possible fallacies because if we're going to discuss all of the fallacies, it's going to be very, very lengthy and it's going to be a lot of explanations and very, very wordy. Um, but these are these are the very common fallacies that you're going to be encountering in your day-to-day life. Like, it's very, very common. So let's start with the first fallacy, the ad hominem fallacy. This is the most common fallacy that uh you you probably have already heard of. At the ad hominem fallacy just basically states that instead that, let's say, the person A uh, is arguing to person B about the importance of a woman being able to have her own choice in making abortions and having her own choice in the decisions that she takes towards her body. And person B tries to argue against that by saying that they're a murderous killer who's prone to having urges to kill babies. And that's basically the essence of the ad hominem fallacy. Instead of arguing against the person's point, the opposing person's point, you're arguing against them personally. Okay? I'm sorry if the example got a little bit morbid. So the second most common fallacy is the strawman fallacy. And this fallacy just basically entails that a person, instead of arguing with the other person's argument, their claim, okay, they're trying to reduce that claim and that argument in order to make it seem like it's absurd. And afterwards, they basically do this rhetorical wave of a hand, like, um, and the essence of it is they're basically just fighting ghosts, and that's quite an oversimplification of it, but they're essentially fighting ghosts that they themselves created in order to try to make your argument look moot and invalid. Okay, like you could see here in this very very funny cartoon depiction, you really shouldn't make strawman arguments. Oh, well, then I guess we should just not have arguments at all. And that is the perfect example of a strawman argument. Instead of trying to argue with the person's argument and their claims, you're trying to make reduction, an absurd reduction or a misrepresentation of their argument. Okay? So the next most common logical fallacy is the correlation versus causation fallacy. So this fallacy basically just entails that just because an event, okay, just because a certain event happened, just because two certain events happened at the same time, doesn't mean that one caused the other. Okay, and I could see a lot of people using this fallacy as well. Uh, like, for example, you could argue that um, you could argue that burning trash. Okay, you could argue that burning trash um, gets rid of ghosts. Okay, it gets rid of it gets rid of a bad omen, and the person who believes that there are bad omen, but and they need to Never mind. That was a very bad example. I'm sorry about that. So just let's just forget about that. But I think the very essence of this fallacy is already made clear already by my earlier description. Um, so let's moving on. The next fallacy will be the false dilemma. So in this fallacy, instead of okay, let's just say that you're met with a choice. Okay, you're met with a choice to either go with computer science or to uh, study study mechanical engineering. Okay, and uh, and your parents try to force you into either one of those because they say that those those courses will yield to better career opportunities, but you haven't really decided or considered upon the multiple opportunities that you could have, the multiple alternatives that you could have to in taking your uh, desired college course, and they're trying to force you into that because as they say, they those have better career opportunities, and that's basically the false dilemma fallacy. You're trying to make other people see or think in a black and white sort of perspective by giving them two options to force them to choose between the two. Okay, so the next most common logical fallacy is a bandwagon fallacy, also known as the argumentum ad populum fallacy, which basically just it just basically says that uh, some people argue that uh, just because just because anime is entertaining, okay, so just because anime is entertaining for a lot of people doesn't mean that it's bad for you. That is bad for you, or it can just it can lower your productivity, but that could be wrong. But I'm not trying to argue against that. But that's just an example, okay, for of what a bandwagon fallacy is. What the bandwagon fallacy is. So let's move forward. We also have the slippery slope fallacy, and this slippery slope fallacy basically just says that it's essentially just someone catastrophizing a situation. Okay, like for example, you think that just because your girlfriend broke up with you, you would argue that you would argue that your girlfriend broke up with you, and you said that that basically just means that you're unlucky and that you should you should you should do harm to yourself, and that's basically just slippery slope fallacy. You're going against this. You're going through this sort of catastrophization, if that's even a valid word. Sort of a you're sort of making the situation worse by thinking that just because one premise happened means that a succession of events are going to happen next, and that could apply whether the events are positive or negative. That's still a slippery slope fallacy, and the caveat for this is it's only a fallacy if there is no connection, if you don't provide a connection towards those events that are potentially going to happen from this one set of event, from the very ground up. Okay, so that's it for the slippery slope fallacy. Now we have the appeal to authority fallacy. And this is also very common. Like if you see a lot of the people in social media, whether it be in Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, these people, some people, they're basically selling their items, right? They're basically selling their items, and let me just give a true to life example. I don't really know where this happened or when this happened, but apparently, okay, um, a set of companies were actually trying to bribe certified doctors into making the general public believe that cigarettes are not bad for your health, and and this is basically what they're doing, right? They're trying to manipulate the public consensus by stating their authority, or what makes them or what kind of credentials they have in order to say that smoking cigarettes aren't bad. Okay, so that's the appeal to authority. And last but not least, the begging the question fallacy. So this is basically when you ask. So let's say that you hypothetically you're trying to argue with somebody, you're trying to debate with somebody about, let's say, the Bible. Okay, let's say that you're arguing with a person about the Bible. Their stance about the Bible is that God resurrected. Okay, like God resurrected, and you try to ask them whether or not God actually resurrected by asking them about archaeological evidence that they may have, or other test credible testimonies from actual people. Okay, from actual people who historically wrote the events down, and can be proven and can be judged accordingly if if that event was actually credible and true. Okay, and instead of the other person actually giving you the evidence, they're saying that, oh, it's because the Bible said it. And that's what basically begging the question fallacy is. That's what it basically is. It just, instead of arguing instead of arguing against your argument or question, or specific question, they just try to they just assume that the premise that they said is the conclusion. Okay, that they just assume that the premise that they said is the conclusion. Like, you can look at this graphic that is on the screen right now. There's a mom and there's a guy, and there's a guy right there. There's a mom and a son. Mom says, clean up this mess. And the son says, but why? And the mom says, because it needs to be cleaned. And that is basically what a begging the question fallacy is. So if you learned anything from this video, okay, I want you to try to avoid these fallacies whenever you're trying to argue with somebody, or whenever you're just having a bit of a dispute with somebody else. Even if they're personally using these fallacies, please don't do them. Okay. So if you learn anything from this video, that should be the key takeaway. We should always use our knowledge for the betterment of society, for the betterment of the collective good. Okay. So thank you for listening.